Great. I'm getting the green light that we are live. Okay. Welcome and thank you for coming. I'm excited to dive back in with you. Today we are on the second part of our four-part series on activating your leadership through courage and self-awareness. I am Leanne Mallorie. I'm an executive coach, creator of the Guts and Grace Women's Professional Coaching Program, and author of the book by the same name, Guts and Grace, A Woman's Guide to Full-Bodied Leadership. I am the go-to coach for secretly woo professional women who are committed to making a big change in their industries, organizations, or communities, and who know they need to do it without burning out. I help women tap into the wisdom of their bodies and fully activate their leadership so that they and their organizations can thrive. And I'm excited to be here with you today to have this continued conversation. Before we dive in too deeply, as I like to do, I want to set the container for our time together by giving us a moment to drop in, to center ourselves and to feel our bodies. So take just a moment and take a nice big deep breath. If you'd like here for this moment, you can close your eyes or just soften your gaze and let yourself feel something in your own physical body, physical sensation to help to bring us present. So you might feel or sense for just the temperature, the weight of your behind on the chair, your feet on the ground. Maybe you notice a pain or an ache, but it's good to know your body's talking to you. Take another deeper breath. And as we do that together, I want to affirm that we are in exactly the right time, at exactly the right place to do just the learning that will support each of us on our paths here today. That we are open and receptive to the new truths that we're ready to hear, and that we are firmly grounded in our own presence and inner knowing at this time. And that this work will serve and that this time is for you. Good, big breath, big exhale. If your eyes were closed, you're welcome to open them and grab your journal or a notebook to take some notes if you would like. So again, this is the second part in our four-part series on activating your leadership through courage and self-awareness. And our theme for today is really the first step on that journey, which is release. Release. So release, this part of the journey is really about embracing surrender, an embodied let go, which starts, of course, with facing what needs to get let go and then beginning to let it go. And inside of this stage, this first step on the journey to full activation of your leadership, this is really the stage where we begin to identify the coherent root cause underneath the less than optimal or even self-sabotaging moves that we make in our leadership, our work, and our life. And that we start to face them and we begin the process of letting them go. So as I mentioned in session one, this is really a process that takes some courage. It takes some willingness to be self-aware. And frankly, it takes some time. When I work with leaders, especially high-performing leaders, often the biggest reason why we don't start a journey of full activation is because who has time to do so? Who has time to face what's not so optimal? We see this in our businesses too, right? It's like, let's just keep building, and yet our systems are falling apart on the back end. We do this, we judge that our organizations do this, we judge that the team on the other side of us does this, and yet how often do we do this inside of ourselves? Yeah, I've got this thing that I do, but you know what? It's working more or less, so I'm gonna just kind of keep going. And then over time, we start to see that the costs maybe get higher and higher of running on the old program. One of my teachers used to say something kind of explicit like, you look down and you see that there's some blood on the floor, but you keep going. And then at some point you realize that the blood is yours. And at that point, you realize the costs are high enough that it's time to change. The costs are high enough that I'm willing to do something different. That may not be your case, right? I mentioned in the first session that we can also be catalyzed by hope, by possibility, by seeing something new for ourselves. But sometimes it's also by the cost. The fact that we realize that something needs to change, and yet we just haven't made the time and haven't actually invested the energy to do it. By the way, it's not comfortable. By the way, who wants to take a look at what's under the hood? When I started to do my work as an executive coach, I was working for 10 years at a firm that was really focused on understanding how we're driven not just by our best intentions, but also by our egos, our old habits and patterns. that our egos run. And what I got to see at that time, when we would spend, say, 9 days or 5 days in a room with really senior level executives and CEOs and teams, we got to just kind of see like under the hood of what's not working. So, like, maybe I'm coming in because I've got this team dynamic that's kind of crappy. And yet, when I actually take a look at myself, there's kind of old programs that I'm running or things that I'm doing that I've never really stopped to clean up. Maybe even all the way back to since I was 7 or 2 or 10. Maybe just since my earliest time in the workforce, I kind of built myself to be and operate this way, but it's starting to outlive its shelf life. So it does take time to go through this process. And again, it takes courage to be willing to let something go, because when we let go, it's like there's this moment of, I don't have anything, and then I'm going to reach for the next thing, the kind of space between the two trapeze bars, if you will. And yet, if we're not willing to take the time to experiment with surrender, to lessen the white knuckle grip, and really let something go, then it's actually very hard to build a new style, a new approach to really come into full presence, to allow new strengths or superpowers to come forward. So, this first step, the practice of release, is critical, and it's worth doing, and it's worth probably doing regularly. But if you haven't done it for a while, then it's probably a good time to consider doing it now. Maybe we're back. All right. I think I'm back online. If you can hear me, let me know in the chat. And while you're at it, if you are listening and something speaks to you about what I was just sharing around, looks like I froze, but I'm back. Speaks to you about what I was just sharing around the release, the let go, what's scary about that, how much you don't like to do it, or what your perspective is on that, please feel free to share something in the chat. Like, let's just say we're talking about releasing old patterns, old paradigms. So, how do you do this? One of the things that I tend to see is that when we get feedback, or we open ourselves to the possibility of change and really wanting to upgrade something in our work or our leadership, we kind of get feedback that's all over the map. You do this and you do that, and here's another thing. Or we have these self assessments that are also a little bit all over the map. A lot of different, we could say, symptoms. So, the first step in this journey of release is really to start to get clear about what is the core underlying one thing, the deeper root cause, or the kind of systems level issue that is responsible for many of the symptoms that we don't like or that we want to change. I call this in my work the core dilemma. The core, you could say the core program, right? The core of something that actually is the reason why all these other symptoms start to show up. And at first brush, one of the most important things to do is to get clear, well, what is that kind of basic root cause, core dilemma, core program, so that you can consider what it might be to release it. Because if you're just releasing symptoms, or you're tackling and trying to shift and change symptoms, what happens? We change a little bit, but not a lot. We change for a little while, but it doesn't stick. And so the self-awareness, cultivating the self-awareness to understand, to look underneath, to really get curious about what's the root cause here, makes a huge difference in the process of transformation. How else might we do this is we might take a look at our history. So it's like, here's what's happening. And then if I go far enough back, maybe I go back in my early life, my childhood, my growing up years. Maybe I don't want to do that, but I know there's something back there. So I decide to have the courage to take a look and just see, like, all right, what was true about me then? And how did I need to be then? Or what was the kind of core belief back then? Or something about actually how I armored myself or shaped myself to contend with my situation that's kind of still hanging around, but maybe not actually needed anymore. Maybe you don't have to go all the way back. Maybe there was a moment in time in your early career when you worked in a certain kind of culture, or you had a certain type of boss, for example. And if you take a look at that, you can start to see, oh, there's a coherency here. There's a coherency to how I'm being, or these symptoms that are showing up and what I tend toward it at the core of me that is relevant to, or was relevant to, those moments in time. But maybe they're not so relevant to where I want to go, or this longing or desire I have to fully activate. So this is part of the process. And then inside of this process, I also will use the acronym MEME, which is MEM squared E, which stands for Movement, Emotions, Mindset, Mission, and Energy. Movement, Emotions, Mindset, Mission, and Energy, which is like where to look in our being, or like what is the fully embodied version of this core program. Meaning, this way that I'm being and doing that is kind of at the core that might want to get shifted or upgraded shows up in my movement. It shows up literally in my posture, my way of carrying myself, for example, in how I move through the world, the shape of me, the pace of me, for example. It also shows up in my emotions, the kind of range that I have or don't have, what I'm allowed to feel and not allowed to feel, for example. It shows up in my mindset, the stories that I tell myself, the thoughts I think, what I worry about, the way that I overplan, for example, the beliefs I have about how the world is going to interact with me. I was talking to a client yesterday, and we said, there's just this core belief that people are going to disappoint me. That's probably going to have to die if you're going to build an A team. The mindset, it's part of my build, right? Mission, it's like what I'm built towards, going towards, or what I'm generally pursuing. What kinds of goals do I let myself have or not let myself have? Am I always kind of run by one intention? I'm a maximizer. I'm always trying to get the most out of everything. And maybe there are contexts where that's actually not working for me anymore, or that's part of the core program or the core dilemma that's been holding me back, in fact. And then last but not least, my energy. So this is a bit of a catch-all, but it's like, what's your presence like in general? Are you feelable? Can you express aliveness or not, actually? This is part of this package. So again, releasing is first about facing, identifying these parts of ourself, or this aspect of ourself that might be at the core, a root cause under some of what's not working or not conducive or a match for where we want to go in our leadership. And the next step is being willing to loosen the grip and start to let go. So what does this look like? I want to give you a client example just to kind of get your head around this. So a number of years back, I was working with a woman, we'll call her Kara. She was the executive director of a nonprofit law firm serving women and girls. And when we met, what she said was she was struggling with confidence. She had actually been number two in her organization for a long time. The person who was in the CEO or the executive director role retired, and she was promoted to that role. And most people said she was doing a great job, but she felt like they were very big shoes to fill, and she wasn't really sure if she could do it at the level she wanted to. Could she really show up? And could she be inspiring? Could she make some of the big changes and big moves she wanted to make to bring this organization to the next level? Could she build the kind of culture that she wanted to build? She just wasn't sure. What we discovered in her embodiment, really the core programming that she carried, was a certain kind of self-deprecation and self-doubt that actually lived in her a bit like a slump. So if you see my body, it's like there was like a downness to it. And in terms of her access to energy, it's like she could only run so much aliveness and then she'd shut it down. So here's this incredible organization doing super meaningful, very challenging work in the world. A lot of passionate, inspired younger folks and older folks actually working for her, doing this work, maybe many of them for many, many years. And the work itself just asks a lot of them. And it's like there's a lot of energy running through their system, and her own body-mind system really couldn't tolerate it. So, for example, what would happen in her behavior is that she would get a good idea or like have an inspiration about somewhere to go or something she wanted to share with her team. And she would start to talk about it. And then literally she would go, I don't know. And she would shut down. And the more exciting it was, the bigger it was, the more possibility was within it, the more potential it may have had to galvanize her team, the more she would start to pull back, or the more quickly she would start to pull back. So, what she wanted was to be inspiring, to make bigger moves, to take risks, to actually take the organization somewhere, but her system couldn't actually tolerate the sensation or the energy of that. So, this was the old shape, the old story. The thing that had to be released was this patterning that she had learned relatively early in her life and also early in her career, that she couldn't get too big, that in fact it was better to be humble. It's a good story, right? I mean, it's true, and also a story that has its kind of limits to what one can do with it, and that she might not really know, or she might be wrong. Like there was a lack of trust in her own instincts inside of that pattern as well. So, first brush, we actually invited her to do some homework where she would catch herself in the act of that, and then it's a bit of an inverse, but essentially let go of the letting go that her body would do. Let go of the shutting down, pulling back, turning inward. So what that amounted to was actually to try on being bolder, to try on saying things even though she wasn't sure, to come back into a full sense of presence when the collapse was likely to happen or starting to happen. And when she found herself compelled to say, I don't know, to interrupt that, let go of the I don't know, and replace it with one thing that she did know, or one real question or one real request that she had in that moment. So the letting go of the pulling back, the questioning, the judging was the practice. What started to happen was that she got more excited. And when she got more excited, other people were more interested in what she had to say. And she started to take more risks that actually led to some really big things for her organization. So she took on raising their first $1 million grant. That happened. She also took on going after a new facility for her organization that ended up coming through the partnership that she had started a number of years ago with another local university. And so a lot of growth happened under her watch while she was in this practice that she really wouldn't have been able to hold space for or to execute on before. This is the power of the release. What she had to let go of was the fear that she'd be wrong, was the potential perception that she wouldn't be seen as humble anymore. She had to let go of the comfort of, I don't know, for the sake of being bigger and being seen in the possibility of being wrong, but also being right. Yeah. So this is the power of the release. And I would say in our particular work together, it took about 6 months to really both get our heads around, like, what is this kind of core thing that needs to be let go? And then like, how do we actually do that? How do you actually let it go? But it paid really big dividends for her and for her organization. So step one, the release. What can we learn from this story, and what can we learn from this part of the practice? One thing is that it takes courage to let an old story go, both the courage to fail in some cases and also the courage to succeed, because that can be scary too. And also, I think there's something we can learn from her story in particular, like when others have more confidence in us than we do, or when the costs of not fully activating are getting too high, it's often a sign that we're ready. So while I said that it took her 6 months to really get all the way through the releasing of this pattern and the stepping into something new, she saw changes in minutes. One of the places she practiced was actually at home with her husband, and she would just practice experimenting with saying, no, I want this. No, I see this. No, I actually think this, where she wouldn't have before. And in her particular case, something changed right away. She got what she wanted. She felt more confident. He noticed. They had more fun together, and so on and so forth. So we are ready when we're starting to get signs that other people see it in us or the costs are getting too high. All right, I hope this is inspiring. It's not the most fun phase of the journey, and I'm aiming to both paint that as real, but also to give you a sense of what can be possible when we're willing to face, to look, and also to start to let go. As we wrap up today, I want to give you a couple questions to simmer on before our next session. One, I invite you to consider 2 or 3 behaviors that have outlived their shelf life for you, ways that you think, do, or be, or act under pressure that may have kind of served a function in the past or served to help you cope in the past, but that aren't totally aligned with the most authentic or effective version of you. This question may or may not help you get to a root cause, but at least it starts to kind of map the territory. So what are a couple of behaviors that for you have outlived their shelf life given who you want to become, given what you're fed up with or the cost that they're creating. Yeah. And then with those behaviors, the second question is, how have they served you? And what are the current day costs? How have they served you? And what are the current day costs? So you can take as long as you would like with this. Once we wrap up this session, you're welcome to sit and do a little journaling if you have the time. Today was our second day in a series of activating your leadership through courage and self-awareness. If you missed session 1, feel free to go back and check it out. It kind of sets the stage for where we're headed. Tomorrow we'll move into the second step, which is how to receive intuitive guidance on your next level, having done some release and let go, and how to create a powerful intention that's bigger than your fears or resistance to guide you on your next steps toward your full activation. If you liked the content today and you want to learn more, or you still have questions about how to implement, I would love to go deeper with you. I'm always interested in having a next steps conversation. We also run some fantastic programs here at Guts and Grace. As a reminder, our core offering is a year-long women's leadership development coaching and mastermind program called Guts and Grace. But for those who may be watching this session and want to get bigger results faster, we also run a high-impact 8-week group coaching program called Activate, which begins in about a month, which is focused on accelerating transformation. So if you are ready to accelerate your transformation and really on the verge of activation or wanting to nudge yourself into a process of activation, I invite you to check out the Activate course and or to book a coaching discovery call with me and my team to find out if one of our programs could be a good fit for you. All right, on that note, I want to close us by coming back into connection with our bodies. Take a deeper breath and a bigger exhale. And just let that all kind of simmer. And I'd like to close us by affirming again that we are in exactly the right place, having exactly the right experiences and conversations at the right time now to get to our next levels of growth. That our paths are coming together right now for a reason, and that reason will be revealed in due time. That what you learned here today will pay big dividends as you continue to reflect on it over the next couple of weeks and even months. And that we are supported, and that everything is always working for us, no matter how challenging, unclear, or surprising it may seem. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll see you online again tomorrow for the next step in our journey together. Thanks all for being here.